Many people have fallen foul of Twitter. Diane Abbott, Labour's Shadow Health Minister, is the latest. Last night in a tweet she wrote, "White people love playing divide and rule." Today she apologised after an apparent dressing down from her leader Ed Miliband and said it was taken out of context. But in a week which has seen two jailed for the murder of Stephen Lawrence, issues of race have never been far from the surface. Was she offensive, or has the whole thing been blown out of all proportion? Here's Liz McKean.
She spent most of her life on the backbenches, but Diane Abbott has built the profile of a political A-lister, apparently glued to the TV sofas. The straight talking she's brought to campaigns against racism and poverty has once again caused a mighty storm, set raging by a little tweet.
I do wish everyone would stop saying the black community.
A freelance journalist, Bim Adewunmi, had tweeted in reference to Stephen Lawrence's murder trial,
I do wish everyone would stop saying the black community, though. Which one?
Abbott replied,
I understand the cultural point you're making, but you're playing into a divide and rule agenda.
Later adding,
White people love playing divide and rule. We should not play their game.
There was a furious reaction online and off it in Westminster.
I think what Diane Abbott said was just a stupid and crass generalisation. She should explain and apologise for what she said.
Let's call it the 140-character defence. Diane Abbott used it to claim her remarks were taken out of context. A thesis on 19th century European colonialism apparently far too great for the truncated medium she'd chosen.
There will continue to be discussions about it, but certainly from the Labour Party's point of view, her position is secure as the Shadow Health Minister, and she has apologised for causing offence, which should be enough.
Do you know that from Ed Miliband, that her position is secure?
Well, I hope her position is secure.
Ed Miliband becomes the latest Labour leader to call Ms Abbott to order. She'd stood against him for the leadership coming last. During the contest, she made much of being the outsider, opposed to the Iraq War and apart from the Blair-Brown cliques. But some of her issues with senior colleagues were personal. She criticised Tony Blair and Harriet Harman for sending children to selective schools. Then she sent her own son to a fee-paying school. The double standard led to a bust-up on her own TV programme.
You said, quote, West Indian mums will go to the wall for their children. So black mothers love their kids more than white.
Andrew, we've just had, I think, one of the most important budgets in a generation. I've said everything I'm going to say about where I sent my son to school.
No, I'm not. That's what I want to. I don't understand this quote. No. Supposing Michael had said, white mums will go to the wall for their children.
Andrew, I've got nothing new to say.
So Britain's first black woman MP found herself accused of racism. Again, a month earlier, this was her description of the coalition's leaders.
I mean, one of the things about this new leadership is how post-meritocratic it is. Two posh white boys from the home counties.
She spent her adult life in the spotlight, so people already know exactly what they think of Diane Abbott. This flare-up tells us not much about her. But the reaction to it reveals plenty about the ever-sensitive issue of race relations in this country. This, after all, is the week in which two white men were jailed for the murder 18 years ago of the black teenager Stephen Lawrence. It was but a partial settlement of the case. Other suspects remain free. But the trial has revived some of the inter-community tensions felt at the time.
It appears to me there's a bit of a backlash, and it's something that we've seen before. We've seen it when Scarman was published back in 1985. We certainly saw it when the Racial Relations Amendment Act was published as well. And it seems that we get a group of very entrenched views coming through, with people arguing that you've actually gone too far in promoting race equality, and now white communities are going to become victims and are not going to be supported in the way they are.
1 hour and 40 minutes we've been stuck there. They were going to burn us alive.
The feeling of unfair abandonment by white working-class communities was identified in a report about race relations for Bradford City Council. shortly before riots broke out there in 2001.
Over a period of time, there has been a neglect of those who are poor and white in our urban areas and indeed rural areas. And I think because we haven't given sufficient attention to that, there is an inclination for resentment to build and for people to be resentful of initiatives which are aimed at dealing with the inequalities that black communities experience.
The fast-flowing nature of Twitter ensures the trend sparked by Diane Abbott's comments will soon fade. In its wake, this week especially, the tough questions about how we all live together and treat each other will not be so lightly set aside.
Liz McKean there. Well, with me now, the broadcaster and civil rights activist Darcus Howe and Sunder Katwala, the director of British Future, a new identity think tank. Thanks to you both for coming in. Darcus Howe, was Diane Abbott right to apologise?
I got about 10 phone calls from friends, activists, non-activists, and all of them black. And they said, what is she apologising about? And that is what surprised me. And who she's apologising to. Miliband is nowhere has the experience of organising working people as Diane Abbott.
So you don't think she should have apologised at all?
I don't know for what. I'll meet her, she'll explain it to me. She said nothing was wrong. She said divide and rule is part of the strategy of political whites. And I'll tell you how it happens to this
Well,
day.
she didn't say political whites for a start, but what?
Well, whites. She will say they like their own type of black.
Sunder Katwala.
You understand that?
I think she's right. I'm glad she's apologised. She's right to apologise because it's crass and offensive. It was a crude stereotype of white people, and she didn't mean to do that. I'm sure, as she said, stereotype all white people, since that's the natural reading of it, she should withdraw. Now, when she said it's taken out of context, I actually think it's worse in context, in a way, because she was actually, talking to a black journalist who said, make a quite cogent point, I think, this issue of community leaders, I have some problems with that. Who's representing who decides it? And so it's actually a policing of debate within black communities, about black communities, that says you can't say that in public, that's divide and rule, you're playing into a white agenda of racist. This is, this is a policing of discourse we don't want. But of course all black people don't think the same thing about everything. That's because of, Darcus, you were, campaigning against racism before I was born and was at school, because of the gains you made and your generation made. Actually, maybe we're somewhere else and somewhere more diverse, and we should welcome that progress as well as realising it's not complete.
I am concerned anybody who tells me something nice about myself. But let's go.
But the point is, if you turn that round, if it was a white MP and they had made a sweeping generalisation about black people, they'd almost certainly be out of a job now.
But why, if it was a white person? No white person ever said it. And if they say it, I have to wait to see who says it, where, and why, and when. So you can't just say if it was a white person. It is not logical.
Well,
I find that Diane Abbott, at this time, is crucial. At the time when Doreen Lawrence and they and us have won that campaign, Diane is itchy to speak, but she has to...
So it sounds like you're excusing what was bluntly a silly thing to say.
She is my comrade and my friend, and I would say the same thing. And I would have told Miliband, why don't you go to hell?
Do you think this is basically a storm in a teacup on a fairly slow news day with somebody who's had form before?
I think it's obviously a question of think before you tweet, and I love Twitter to bits, and it's not always the place to have nuanced discussions, perhaps, but actually the outrage about it goes too far as well. I think apologise, withdraw, let's move on and have a serious conversation, because with all of these cases about racism at the moment, whether it's on the football field and whatever, there's big serious issues we've seen with Stephen Lawrence, but we're always having a shouting match where everyone's outraged by this. We actually need a conversation.
All right,
about
well, let's
these
have the
issues.
conversation, because Herman Osley, we saw in that report, was talking about the sense of sort of poor white isolation, if you like, as being one of the reasons, possibly even the backlash from the Stephen Lawrence convictions. Do you buy that this week?
Of course there's an issue that if there's resentment and competitive grievances, that's a massive problem. But the real problem is if we then have to choose, you can either deal with the racism that affects the black community or you deal with the exclusion of the white community. We want a fair society that we're all part of. That's why the Stephen Lawrence verdict is massively important. But Darcus was probably the first person 20 years ago to say a sort of multiculturalism where white people have no role except as oppressors will never get us anywhere in our society. We can't
And
have racial
nobody has
justice
ever
for
heard
the
me saying
majority.
anything like that. Diane came into the Labour Party under black sections in the Labour Party because the Labour Party would not have and could not have black MPs. They fought, they campaigned. She became on that issue alone. And the black community, for the first time in human history in this country, could they rely on someone who knew them, where they came from, who didn't have to go.
So, Darcus Howe, what do you make? What then do you make of the reaction, the response to her tweet? I mean, do you think this is a sort of febrile nature of the
I just think it will go away. What concerns me is that Diane is in a shadow cabinet with people who are very inferior to her politically, and she is made Minister of Public Health, and they go out and speak about blacks, and she has to sit there waiting to listen to what the rest of them have to say, which amounts to nothing.
All right, thank you very much. We'll have to leave it there. Just before we go, let me take you through the front pages